Good morning. Talking to the media recently in Brazil, India's External Affairs Minister Jaishankar said that China had disregarded the border pacts with India and this has cast a shadow on the bilateral relations. The border pact that Jaishankar is referring to are the 1993 and the 1996 bilateral agreement wherein both sides agreed that not more than 5,000 troops will be brought by either side close to the line of actual control without mutual consent. And as we are aware today, there are many thousand PLA troops both in the Tibet Autonomous Region and the Xinjiang Division. So, how did this happen? So, first of all, I disagree completely with Jay Shankar that China has disregarded these agreements. No. What China has done is that it outsmarted India by capitalizing on its political and its military weaknesses at the time of the Doklam crisis in 2017. And this is what I will explain how they managed to do that. And the content of this, what I say, and what I am saying now in this video and the subsequent video, all the contents, they are from my latest book, which is The Last War, which came in the market on the 10th of August. And I would recommend that all Indian military officers should read this book for the simple reason that in case of a war between India and China, they must know, and the people of this country must know, that we will be fighting a highly disadvantageous war. Because what the Indian military will be fighting is a tactical war, which is a war concept called air land battle, which is of the vintage of 1986. And what the Chinese will be fighting, the PLA will be fighting a combination of three wars, which is the information war, informatized war, which is about information superiority, and intelligence-sized war, which is about intelligence superiority based on data purity and data superiority. All this has been discussed in lucid and plain way for the readers in my book, The Last War. And I highly recommend that, because if there is a war, it is almost certain that the PLA will do something spectacular, something the world has not seen, use of artificial intelligence in warfare, and all this is explained in detail in this book. Now, coming back to the subject that we started. So, what are these political and the military weaknesses which the PLA capitalized on during the Doklam crisis? Now, the Chinese were aware, everybody was aware, that when Mr. Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister in 2014, there was an irrepressible urge in the BJP to showcase him as a superhero by disaggregating the reality from the perception, which they successfully did in the 2016 so-called surgical strike. So the Doklam crisis happened 1 year later in 2017, and the army chief then was General Bipin Rawat. So the mandate of Bipin Rawat was very clear, and this now, of course, we have so many articles on this which have come out after his death. His mandate was how to flex the muscle and how can we stop the PLA advance at a tactical level where we were in an advantageous position. And I remember that everybody declared in this country after this 72 days crisis that, look, India had won the Doklam crisis. But actually, India had lost that crisis because India failed to understand the objectives of the Chinese. And the reason they failed to understand is A, because for the political weakness that I mentioned, and B, because of the military weaknesses. Now, India's biggest military weakness, or the weakness of the Indian army, which is supposed to be the lead of the Indian military, is that since 1991 it has been wholeheartedly, fulsomely involved in the insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir, trying to stabilize the situation there, so much so that a spectacular event like the 1991 Operation Desert Storm, which was done by the Americans against the Iraqis, was completely missed in India. I remember clearly working for the Indian Express as a journalist at that time. I had met the then army chief, General Bipin Joshi, and I asked him, I said, what are the lessons from Operation Desert Storm that perhaps the Indian Army and maybe even the Indian military leadership could learn? And his reply was that, look, my job, my mandate right now is only to stabilize operations in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, I can understand his predicament, I could understand his limitation of the time, but for the next 25 years, I dare say, there has been an abdication of responsibility by the army, successive army leaderships and the military leaderships in not keeping themselves abreast of the advances in warfare. And this is what I call intellectual laziness, for which we have paid and we will continue to pay a very heavy price. Why do I say that? Because the biggest lesson of Operation Desert Storm was straight and simple. The Americans had raised the war level from tactical to operational. What they used to do was the air-land battle, the 1986 war concept, which was about tactics. They raised it because of something called the battle networks. For the first time, the world and the PLA and the Russians, everybody saw the battle networks of the Americans, which now brought the war at an operational level where everything would be, all the domains, everything would be used for the war outcome. So that is where the PLA focused its eyesight, and that is where it was determined since then to beat the Americans at their own game, the game of network centricity, and that is where they have achieved a lot. And this is the enemy that we face, rather it is sitting on our territory today. Now, the other thing what happened was that because of intellectual laziness of the Indian Army and the military, it was not very difficult for Prime Minister Modi, when he came to power, to use the army for political tasking. Tasking not for the national objective, but tasking for the party, the ruling party objective. And how this was done is that in his first Combined Commanders Conference in October 2015, the Prime Minister gave out the threats to the military and the military accepted it. In any professional military, it is the military's primary task to make an assessment, to war game, to experiment the threats that face the nation and project those threats to the government of the day. Here it was the other way around. And the threat given, because it suited the political tasking, was that the enemy is known, Pakistan. The threat is invisible terrorism. So bash on, and all you have to do is fight terrorism. And the army and the military readily accepted, because of intellectual laziness and not having been in sync with the advances in warfare, that this indeed was the sole threat facing India. So much so that two momentous events which happened in 2012, which I have described in detail in my book, they were completely missed by the military in this country. In 2012, the first event was the coming of power of Xi Jinping in China when he became the General Secretary. Within a year, in 2013, he announced the Belt and Road Initiative, under which China was offering now prosperity, trade, commerce to the developing and the less developed nation through the land corridor as well as the maritime corridor. So the Belt and Road had two components, the land and the maritime. Now, once this happened, the role of the PLA expanded. Why it expanded is because China was to spend billions of dollars on the Belt and Road Initiative, and China, obviously as a rising power, it wanted that its people, its infrastructure, its interest in all the nations which are on board the BRI be protected by the People's Liberation Army. And hence the PLA needed reforms. And the reform process started. And in 2014, the PLA came out with absolutely an unprecedented, which had never done before, military strategy. Because for the first time, instead of doing continental defense, the PLA was to do out of area operations in in support of its, as I said, the assets, which is called the cooperative security, and all which is discussed in detail in the book, in support of the asset infrastructure and its people uh, in the PRI nations. So this was to happen. Now, as a consequence of this military strategy, organizational changes happened, and the Western Theatre Command was created in 2015 December. Now, it should have occurred to the Indians that look, this Western Theatre Command, which they have now created, and which is geographically their largest command, geographically the largest command, and its sole task is to fight a war with India. So, shouldn't they want the troops also to come there? And wouldn't the 1993 and 1996 agreement prohibit that? But no, this was not thought at that time, at the time of the Doklam. So the Chinese were clever. This is what they did. They chose a place. They chose Doklam. Why Doklam? Because Doklam, on the eastern side, which is Sikkim, you have Sikkim, all the heights are held by the Indian Army. Indian Army is at an advantageous position. Then there was a dispute between India and China on the tri-junction, where the tri-junction should be. Now, as far as they were concerned, as far as the Chinese were concerned, they said the tri-junction is Gimochin, and because of that, then Doklam becomes part of China. Whereas the Indians were saying, no, this is Batangla, and if it is Batangla, then Doklam becomes part of Bhutan. And India has a 2007 agreement with Bhutan that look, we will come and help you because you do not have your own military. In fact, they don't even have a defense minister. The king of Bhutan looks after defense also. So we will assist you in your security. And because of that, right after the 62 war, India has an Indian military, which is called the IMTRAT, Indian Military Training Team, permanently positioned in Bhutan. And this, in case of a war or a crisis with China, it is supposed to build up to a division strength. And then, so here was the setting. The setting was, all right, there is an international angle, there is Bhutan. India will feel that yes, we need to do something to help Bhutan because in any case we are tactically at an advantageous position. And then the Chinese also knew that look, because the thinking is so tactical, right from 40 years back and even today in 2017, the Indian Army leadership gave unnecessary importance to the Jampheri Ridge, which is the southern end of the Chumbi Valley. The thinking is that if the Chinese come to occupy the Jampheri Ridge, they will overlook the Siliguri corridor, which is our thin sort of a connection. We have the land corridor, a thin connection between mainland India and our northeastern state, not realizing that the technology has come into the PLA. PLA today has a capability of round-the-clock surveillance of very high resolutions, and it has standoff weapons. It need not physically be at Jampheri Ridge, but so be it. This is what the situation was. So all that the Chinese had to do was, they said, now even before they started their crisis, they created the crisis, they were clever enough. The senior most commander of the Western Theatre Command, he came to meet our Eastern Army commander at that time, who is General Praveen Bakshi. And how we know this is because Praveen Bakshi, 1 year after his retirement, he said so. He said that the top commander had come to meet me, a courtesy call, and there he told me that look, when I was a youngster, I would walk all these places, they were so peaceful, and I want that my boys now do patrolling here. In other words, suggesting that look, patrolling normally the PLA used to do before Doklam. What they would do is the focus was on the border management and the patrolling used to be done in jeeps. So a track needed to be made to Jampheri Ridge. And Bakshi says that he and his officers, senior officers, they all noted this observation. What did not occur to Bakshi, Praveen Bakshi, is very simple thing. Then why has he come here? Why is he talking all this? Because the Western Theatre Command has been created. He came just to size up the army leadership in the Eastern Theatre Command, how they were thinking. Would they be asking questions about the Western Theatre Command? That when do you bring the troops there? Nothing was asked. So the stage was set for the Chinese. Now all the Chinese had to do was, start making the road, try and make the road, which was stopped by the Indian side, and they said, no, you cannot take this track down to Jamphiri Ridge, because that is our vulnerability, that is our strength. We have to be there, we have to hold that. Long and short is very simple. This crisis continued for 73 days, and 13 rounds of talks were held, where our national security advisor Ajit Doval, he was in Beijing, other people were there in Beijing, all talks were held in Beijing. And then the Chinese, they unleashed their, what we know is the wolf warriors. They started drumming this war cries that, look, there can be war anytime because your troops have come into our area, because of the understanding of the two tri-junctions. Now, Praveen Bakshi clearly says that, look, I had no option, and the center supported me, the government supported me. I had to increase my troops in case there is a war. So the Indian side increased the troops, and they kept, and their wolf warriors, they went crazy, the Chinese. The whole idea was that to spur them further, to push them further, that look, there is a war. So more and more troops were inducted by the Indian side, and in self-defense, the Chinese also brought in their troops in self-defense. They did not abrogate, they did not revoke the 1993 and 1996 agreements, as Jaishankar mentioned and what I said. Now, after the crisis was over, the Indian troops went back. They never went back because they said, this is our territory, we are supposed to be here. So, this is the way to put the things into perspective. First of all, we have to face the truth, the reality. So, this is the reality, and this is the beginning of the problems for India. Now the PLA has troops. The Western Theatre Command has all the troops that are necessary, and all details are in the book. Now, the second event which I mentioned, which was completely missed in this country, also happened in 2012. And this was the discovery of deep learning by a computer scientist, Australian computer scientist called Geoffrey Hinton. Now, what was this deep learning? What used to happen is that there was disparate data. Some sort of artificial intelligence was understood. There was disparate data. Data could be in the form of a fact, a picture, sound, video, a word, or a statistics. Anything is data, which any sensor can pick up. Sensor, in the low Earth orbit, in the geostrategic orbit, or your airborne assets, or your ground radars. Anything that is picked up is data. Now, you have to make sense of that data. Now, what does that data signify? So, this was very simple. There were data scientists. So, what they would do is pick up a certain algorithm, and after cleaning this data, the picture or the video or the word or the statistics or the fact, it would be fed into the algorithm. And then the algorithm, basically, this is hastening the job of a human being. If a human being was to find information, what is called intelligence also, from the data, he could take weeks at end. Whereas the computer, using algorithms, it can do it very fast and it will be accurate. So what input you give in the terms of data, you get the same output, you get the information. It was very simple, but this was called artificial intelligence, which actually it was not, because quicker calculations do not equate with intelligence. Now, intelligence came with deep learning. So it was this computer scientist who was inspired by the human brain. Now we know human brain has billions of neurons which are connected by synapses. So there are so many neurons and they're all connected. So when a human being sees anything, let's say he sees a car coming, he sees a fact, that data comes in, he immediately is able to process everything, because of so many neurons in his brain and react also to that. So this was the inspiration. So the inspiration was, how do we create artificial neurons? Obviously, they could not be created in so huge volumes, but they could be done still, where you could have what is called the neural networks, what you could have the algorithms, the appropriate algorithms, in blocks, and they could be connected, inspired by, as I said, the human neurons. So this is what the deep learning was about. So the deep learning was basically about that you create this machine learning algorithms, and then you feed in the information. The data, from data you make the information. What is information? Information is basically the meaning, the pattern. What is this data about? See, I cannot explain all this in a video, but everything has been very plainly explained in my book. So you pick up the information and now you run that information, the actual information which has been collected from the ground. You run that information through this block of neural network. Now, as this run, what happens is that these algorithms are getting trained. There billions and billions of trillions of data sets are being fed of this information, and they get trained. They get trained and they become what is called the deep learning algorithms. That means now they have imbibed, they have understood the examples. Now it is this deep learning algorithm which is about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, in very simple words, is how to simulate human intelligence into machines, into software networks, into robots. How do you do that? So you do that by creating these neural networks and by the process which is called deep learning. So this is what it is all about. So what it needs, a key component, is data. Data is very important in this. Now, Chinese realized very early, because they were following all these developments, the deep learning, when it was discovered, and subsequently how it was used on the commercial side, and they were obviously thinking about using it in warfare also, the deep learning. So the first data conference, because they realized that data is a strategic source. So the first data conference was held in China in 2017, and it was a big event where the PLA was involved. And it was unanimously agreed that, look, data basically is of three types. The best data is what is called the training data. Training data is the basic data you pick up for training. Now this, as far as warfare is concerned, if you pick up some data, let's say a data picked up, we recently had this crisis in Taiwan where we witnessed that the PLA had used a lot of missiles. So that data came from the missiles, because even the ballistic missiles, they flew over across Taiwan. So all this data is training data which can be used in Western Theatre Command. That is training data. Now, better than training data will obviously be the military data. Military data basically would mean that anything which is done in one theatre, how do you use it in the other theatre? Something very close to what is the training data. And the best data would be the operational data. Operational data basically means that you collect the example. You collect the example, you get the right answers and run them through the deep learning algorithms from the theatre where eventually the war is to be fought. So, we all would have noticed, started 2018, Xi Jinping, he became the first General Secretary, the first top leader of China to actually say that realistic combat training is a must. He publicly addressed the troop and he told them, he exhorted them for realistic combat training. Why? Because it is this training, doing the training in Western Theatre Command, which will get the data sets, the real example, then you can take the robo anywhere. And with these data sets, you train the robo. Once the robo is trained and he comes back to the theatre and he fights alongside the human beings, where the human is in command and the fire control is with the robo. The robo can actually excel in accuracy, in precision, in being fast, in closing the kill chain early than the human being. In other words, if you use artificial intelligence, then artificial intelligence by pure data, by data which is operational data and in huge quantities, then you close the kill chain early. This is what artificial intelligence will do. And subsequently, the control will go from the human to the machines, the command and control. All this has been explained in this details in this. Now coming back to where I started. So Jay Shankar, when he says border pacts negated by China, no, China was smart enough, made use of India's weaknesses and achieved two major objectives. Objective number one, without being seen as an aggressor, it has brought a whole lot of troops in the Western Theatre Command. Objective number two, by doing realistic training in this theatre, they are having operational data which will help them in the robots which will eventually be used in a war with India in the same theatre from the Western Theatre Command. If you recall, in August of 2020 itself, the Chinese, the PLA brought the 5G in the Western Theatre Command, and all our analysts said that, look, this is for better communication. Of course, this is one area. The key was that 5G was being used for what is called the Internet of Military Things, so that you can collect the data from various sensors in the air, sensors in outer space, sensors on land. The data can be collected and then it can be brought for processing to the central cloud, or the edge computing can be done with it. So all this experimentation was being done by the PLA. Details are there in my book. Today we are at such a situation that we need to understand this war. Now in my next video, I'll be talking about the myth of the two-front war. Until then, thank you.